Hello, hello, hello. This is Tooth Be Told. This is Dr. Walter Aka.
This is Dr. Leroy Horton.
Dr. Stephen Paige.
All right, so listen, everybody, it's a big treat for me, and I know it's going to be a treat for you. This is one of my closest friends in the whole wide world. We were business partners for the greater part of like 12 or 13 years. We still collaborate. We still travel together, go to conventions, hang out, talk all the time. One of the neatest, coolest, most interesting people on the planet, kind of like the Dos Equis guys, right? One of the most, he's got a story for everything. This is the illustrious, the well-known, especially in the greater Northwest, Dr. Stephen Paige is here to entertain us and give us some really deep insight after 38 years in the game of dentistry. So Steve, how you doing, my man?
I'm doing fantastic, and thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. So I wanted to open up with a kind of a lighthearted question, but it gets to the heart of who you are. And this is why I really wanted to ask this question. So when me and you interviewed years ago, I don't know if you remember, but I walked in and literally we talked for like 3 or 4 hours and barely talked about dentistry. We talked about everything but dentistry. And that was the first time I met you when we interviewed. One thing that I've come to notice about you is no matter where we go, you know Black people. And no, seriously, listen. Okay, Steve, how old are you? You're 70, right?
71.
Okay, you're a 71-year-old Jewish guy who happens to be in the in crowd of all the brothers and sisters, no matter where we go. And I know it has something to do with your upbringing and where you were raised and who you were around. So why don't you give us, a brief spiel on the young, early years of Steve Paige?
Yeah, well, believe it or not, I'm so old that I actually started grade school, and my school was integrated by busing back in New York in the 1950s. And I remember moving out to, I think it was California in the 1980s. And I remember they were talking about busing at that time. And there was like a whole big thing about it. And I remember thinking, what? I was in the kindergarten when they were busing me. And it just totally blew me away that this was California in the late 80s, late 70s, early 80s. And they were arguing about it, So it was mind-boggling to me. I guess growing up in New York is about as progressive as you can get, really, And then I grew up, and then I moved to Jamaica, Queens, which is a highly integrated neighborhood. And I had more people of color in my class than white people.
Right.
Yeah. And I mean, so to me, just integration. I mean, I kind of grew up in projects even, and like I grew up in a area which was 20 buildings. Each building had 3 sections, 13 stories. And every apartment was cookie cutter. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And like, I know, but the nice thing about it was I could go outside summer, winter, fall, didn't matter. I can go outside anytime during the day, and there'd be like 50 guys I knew hanging out, Like if you grow up in the suburbs, you'd have to like find your way to a friend's house or have your parents drive you over. I would just walk outside and there'd be like 50 people I knew. So there was benefit to it, Right. But it was a lower income area, and but I didn't feel poor, I really didn't. I mean, because everybody around me was a very similar situation. And except when I went to visit my cousins, they lived in the suburbs, and then I noticed the difference.
That's when you realized how poor you were, right?
Yes, that's right. Then I realized what they had and I didn't have, and they were all going to like the best colleges, and I was going to community college at the time because it was free. It was actually free to go to community college in New York City, but that changed. It's still cheap, but it's not free anymore. And so I did what I could to get myself, not to put myself in heavy debt by the time I graduated, I still ended up being in debt though. That's the way it was, but it wasn't as bad as it could have been.
Okay.
Steve, let me ask you, one, where did you go to school for dentistry? And then also, what made you move west? I mean, the East, I'm from Philly area, You know,
Oh,
I couldn't imagine moving to the West area because it's so different. Just people, the dynamics, the way people interact with each other. So, what made you what school did you go to for
okay.
dentistry, and
Well,
what made
well,
you
first of
move
all,
west?
I was actually born in Philadelphia.
Hmm.
So,
I listen. He's already won. He's you
well,
you won
I
the
was
game.
born. Well, you know what? Listen, we're talking about my history. I was born in Philadelphia, and my father died when I was 3 years old of polio. And actually, just like 6 months before they released the polio vaccine. Yeah. And then so my mom couldn't afford staying there. So we moved to my grandparents' house, which was in Brooklyn, New York. And then we moved to Queens and Jamaica. And I did a lot of moving around, but I always thought that living, I don't know why I thought it. I just thought living out west would be better. And I don't know why, but I had a dream to do that when I was really young, like 10 years old. And so pretty much I finished college, and then I moved out to California, and I was actually an engineer. I graduated with an engineering degree, and I did it for a few years, and I did not like the whole corporate structure. And so I decided I had to find something that I can do that would kind of put me in my own business, and I can get out of that corporate structure. And I had two friends that had graduated dental school, and I remember saying to myself, I could probably do that. And at the same time, I was dating a girl whose father was a legal advisor, a lawyer for the California Dental Association, and I met all these people that were dentists. And I remember thinking, that would be a good thing for me to do. They were all in their individual businesses. They all seemed to be happy with what they were doing. So I went back to school and took a few courses that I didn't take, like biology. That wasn't something I did in engineering. And then I took the DATs, got into Marquette Dental School. And at the same time, I was engaged to be married to my present wife, whose parents live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So, she was pregnant. So it just turned out to be great, where I could go to school, have babysitting with my in-laws. And, it turned out to be a good thing. But when I graduated, I still wanted to fulfill my dream of going back out west. So once I graduated, my father-in-law said, "Well, are you going to work here?" I go, "Hey, I love you, man, but I'm not staying here." So I headed back out to California, and then I did that for working for people for about 8 years, and then I moved to Washington, and then started my own business. That's a pretty much a good synopsis of how it all went down.
That's awesome, man. So when you were working in California, was that as a private owner? Was that in a corporate setting? What did that look like?
Yeah, that was a corporate setting, and I really really quickly became the manager because I was hustling, and they quickly made me the manager of it. And in those days, what it looked like was there was a law in California where you could only own two dental practices at a time. And so what a lot was going on was, which eventually became the norm is in many places, where a marketing company owns all the equipment, and owns everything. But you're the quote unquote doctor, so your name's on the door. You're the one who owns the quote unquote practice, but you don't really own the facility. And I worked really 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 hard, for 8 years, and I learned. But doing that, I learned that type of business.
Okay.
So when I moved to Washington, it fit me because I didn't want to be one of those people that was the highest price around, because I saw that type of practice. Although I don't begrudge anybody for working that way, because I don't have to tell you it's an easier life when you can work that way. But so I always wanted to make dentistry as affordable for people as I could, and at the same time make a fair living for myself. And so I took that model that I learned when I was working in California, brought it to Washington, and started opening offices. And as you know, I opened a couple, multiple. I had 6 going at one time, but over the years, I probably had maybe 12 that I bought some, sold some, and and the model, which is basically I worked with labor unions, and I would through another friend of mine that's not a dentist, but he's a really good marketing guy. And together we went to unions and we made deals with them where we could use their individual dental plans they had, which they were self-funded, and we would make really good deals in the fee schedule. And if they came to us, they would either have no out-of-pocket cost or very little out-of-pocket, and they can get their dental work done to within the confines of the plan. And so the trade-off was, I made a good living. The patients got a really good deal, and the trade-off was I had to work a lot harder than your average dentist. I had to really hustle to make it happen. And as you know, I don't have to tell you, but the people listening today, they need to know it. But you already know it.
Yeah. Well, you I know there's a story that you told me regarding how you got fed up with the corporate entity you were working with towards the end before you branched out on your own. And you tell this really good story of how much you were producing and how much you were taking home. Can you share that with us? Because I feel like I'm hearing a lot of young dentists that are getting wrapped up with DSOs expressing something very similar.
And then also, can you also, Steve, tell us the year? Because I want people to see that, corporate dentistry has been around way longer than we think.
Oh, yeah. It was, I worked there from 1986 to 1994. And I got to tell you, they were around probably for 10 years before that.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but anyhow, I worked for them really hard. In 8 years that I worked for them, there was never a patient complaint. There was never any lawsuits. There was never any board complaints. And towards the end, when I was trying to decide what I wanted to do at that point, I asked for a raise, and they told me that they couldn't afford it, and I knew darn well that they could really afford it, it just, but you don't want to begrudge it too much. Everybody has their own view in life of how they want to deal with their own money. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so I just decided that was a really good time for me to move on and do my own thing, because number one, I had the training in business I needed. And number two, I certainly had 8 years of working like a dog, and I had really good dental experience. So between my dental experience and my ability to work really hard, it was time to go,
Okay. And not to press you on specifics, but I think sometimes they can be important. I do remember you saying that there was a certain amount of production towards the end that you hit as the office you were managing versus what your take home was at the time. And when you did the math on that, you were like, this.
Oh,
yeah.
I was probably making percentage wise of what I was probably getting paid 15% of what I was producing. Yeah. And as you know, when you leave the place like Southern California, where it's really dog eat dog, like you go away, the average pay is like 28 to 32, percent. So at that time, I knew I had enough experience, and I knew I was good, and I figured it was time to do my own thing and move on.
Gotcha.
Steve, let me ask you a question about this. Ready? So if somebody's young and they're coming out, and some DSOs will basically say, hey, I'm going to give you a guaranteed flat salary, okay, versus a percentage. And if you're coming out and let's just say that this company says, I'll give you $160,000 guaranteed salary versus 30 to 35% of, adjusted collection or adjusted production. Right? Which one would you take? And the reason why I say that is because my own experience was like this. The first company I ever worked with before I went to Perio basically said, I'll give you the 160. And I said, oh man, that's incredible. I'm coming out of school. I'm poor. I thought 160, I had made it rich. I mean, I'm talking to my friends. I'm going out to dinners. Like, this is the first time I've ever done anything like this. I'm talking about like some good steak, And so I'm thinking 160, I'm rich, until I decided to go to Perio. I worked that year, and then I basically did my numbers, and I realized that I was getting about 12% of what I actually produced.
Yeah.
So then I looked and I was like, well, what was the point? If I would have gotten 20, I would have made way more.
Absolutely.
And so what advice would you give to these students coming out when it comes to seeing a guarantee versus something you have to work for?
Well, I would say really, it depends how well they know themselves. If they know that they feel very comfortable and doing things, let's say faster than the average person can do it, then sure, they're way better off doing the percentage, especially if they see that there's a constant patient flow. But if someone that's really right out of school and really doesn't have that comfortable feeling of doing everything yet, they might want to take the guarantee until they have a year experience. I'll tell you what I found. We're hiring, Dr. Horton knows I've hired 300 people over my career probably, and I would say if I took 10 dentists, 2 of them were gifted, okay? Meaning that somehow in school situation they were able to accomplish a lot more, really feel good about what they're doing and able to do it. I would say 6 more really average for coming out of school. I knew what to expect from them. And I would say 2 more, unfortunately, I had to find a nice way of telling them that they needed to get more experience before they could work here,
Yes.
So that's what I found out over the years. And so if you're and the doctors who were those 2 were really good, I found they also knew that how much money they wanted to make, and they would tell me how they wanted to get paid, and I ended up negotiating because they were very aggressive in how they wanted to get paid, and the other 6 average ones, I usually started them out with a guarantee because I think it was better for them because they didn't have to feel pressure to work maybe faster than they were comfortable, and maybe that would lower their quality, right? So I think by doing that for the first 6 months or a year was good, and then we always had a bonus system based on average monthly daily production over a month. We had a bonus system. I felt that worked good for me. I would say if I calculated it, probably they were making someone who just was so was probably doing in the 25%, maybe 25 or 26% of the production or the collection numbers, I would say. And then people who would hustle could do, let's say 28, to 30. We weren't in a position to pay 35 because our fees were generally very low, as I don't have to tell Dr. Hunt, he knows we were working off of low fees. But in general, I think if someone could hustle really good, they're probably better off going on a percentage if they really feel comfortable with themselves and they can hustle. But I also found that other than those 2 out of 10 that come out gifted, the other 6 probably took about a year and a half to really feel comfortable doing extractions, doing the root canals. They needed a year and a half. And when I say a year and a half, I mean like a year and a half working for us, which was, really, hustling, right? If they went to work for someone that really wasn't expanded and they didn't get to do much, in a year and a half, they'll still be where they were when they graduated, pretty much.
Right.
Yeah,
well, I got into a little social media back and forth with someone a while back, and I sent it to Walt to get his opinion. But it was a brand new grad who was making comments on a post regarding offices starting off new grads at a guaranteed $1,000 a day, right? Brand new grad. So if you can give us just some hypothetical numbers in your general run-of-the-mill office, what do you think it would look like for someone to be justifiably making $1,000 today as the base guarantee, let alone, before you add any bonus structures or anything? Because I don't think a lot of new doctors know what it takes.
Yeah, I would say that it would take it would take $3,500 a day of production collected to be able to pay somebody $1,000 guaranteed.
Right. And what is that, in a typical day as a general dentist? Do you think that's an easy target to make for someone that's new? Or do you think that's more for a seasoned doctor where you could predictably make that much plus?
Once again, it gets back to the 1.5 years of experience hustling. I think to comfortably do that in a day, you have to have that 1.5 years for the average dentist. But those 2 gifted people, they were able to do it within, 3 months.
Yeah.
But the average one, those 6 out of 10, it takes a year and a half.
So when we're looking at dentistry right now, and I want your opinion on this, your honest opinion. You remember back in the 70s and 80s, 80s and 90s, like how dentistry was, right? You could go and open your own practice and so forth. I saw a stat that basically said that by 2025, 2030, we're going to have DSOs be about 50% of dentistry. And you see a lot of people selling to DSOs because DSOs now have deep pockets with venture capitalists investing in them. How does that look for dentists in general? How does that look for dentistry in general? Do you think that's a positive, negative, or even? Like, you don't really think it's going to change much of dentistry?
Oh boy,
that's a loaded question. I know
that's a real loaded question, and of course, I'll always be honest.
Please.
I would say it's in big cities. It's probably more positive than negative. I think because if you have 1 office, 2 offices, 3, and you have dentists working for you, you have to make each office really pay for itself, right? So your percentage of profit has to be decent. If you have 500 offices like the DSOs do, they don't look at it that way. They look at each office just making a little bit of money, but not being in the negative. Because with 500 offices, they're looking at having every office cover itself, make a little bit of profit, and then the investors getting paid back some money. Okay, and of course the CEOs getting paid. So I don't know what the actual numbers are, but let's say with DSOs, if you have 500 offices and each office can profit 10%, they're probably doing really, really well. Right. But in a private office, if you're profiting 10%, you need to close the doors, so that's the difference. And so when you go to, when they hire young guys, they could probably afford to hire a young guy probably for more money than a small private office could afford to pay. And with Dr. Hortman, you agree with that?
I think so. I think, you're right in the fact that if they only have to make 8 to 10% off each office, whereas we individually would have to make at least 25% to be able to have money to live off of and paying our expenses. Right. They could probably pass that extra percentage down so they can recruit doctors and keep the wheels going in their offices better than we can.
Well, okay, so if that's what's happening, then is it realistic for these new graduates to be so against corporate dentistry when they're the only ones that seems, based on what you guys are saying, to be able to hire these doctors and give them a higher pay? Like, is it realistic for these new docs to say, I want to work for an office that's fee for service, or I want to work for this private guy? Is that really reasonable now?
No, I don't think so. Not in the big cities, because it's not where it's going, and those jobs are not going to be available. If they believe that, it's because they're hearing it from some older retired guy that probably doesn't like it. You know what I mean? But in a small town, still, I don't see the place for DSOs really in a small town setting so much.
Why is that?
I just think they don't have the mass populations that they need to drive into DSOs to make it happen. I think that fits more a slower practice with higher fees, and I think where a guy can make a living without having to produce a lot of money, because he has a higher profit margin because his expenses are less. In big cities, the rents kill you, employment kills you. As you know, right now, we're going through this very, very, very weird situation where suddenly there's nobody looking to work in the dental industry, and no one seems to really know why. I've been trying to figure it out. I know Dr. Horton and I have been trying to figure it out. It's just like you can't find hygienists, you can't find assistants, and it all started with COVID, But I don't know that COVID is the whole blame, but it certainly took a part in it. I used to take ads out in the newspapers or Craigslist, stuff like that. And I could get the next morning, I'd wake up and there'd be 10 or even 20 applications for dental assistants. And I'd go through the resumes, and I'd pick the ones I'd wanted to interview, and then they would come over and I'd interview them and I'd be able to pick. Now I could take an ad, those same ads out, and I'd get 0 responses the next day. 0. And I asked myself, how is that possible? But no one really seems to have the answer.
Right. And so let me ask you this. So you mentioned this notion of 3,500 a day, right? Yeah. And we also know, because we haven't even gotten into insurance companies, right? And so let's say your general reimbursement for a crown is, say, $750 from Delta Dental, right? So to do that, you would have to do 5 or 6 crowns a day in a private office. Right. With the saturation level, how easy is it to be able to get 5 or 6 crowns per day consistently to be able to make that type of living for someone, especially in the big cities?
You can't, and that is the problem now, because there are just so many in big cities. There's so many, like, say, DSOs and other people that are so competitive that they'll take every single PPO, okay, no matter how low it is, $500, whatever it is, and people will go there because the general consensus of patients is that dentists are all rich, right? And we don't work hard enough for our money. And it's really true. Okay, this would be a great time to tell you one of my stories, okay?
Okay.
If you don't mind, okay?
Go ahead.
I was on an airplane, and it must have been about 15 years ago. And I was on an airplane, I think I was going to Chicago, and there was a guy sitting next to me, a little bit older than me, and he was going to his 50th high school year reunion, and we were talking. He says, "What do you do?" I said, "Well, I'm a dentist." And he goes, "Oh man, I just had a crown done. You guys are so expensive." He went into that song and dance. So I thought it was a really great opportunity to ask him. I said, "Okay, I'm going to ask you a question, but you really got to be honest with me. You won't hurt my feelings. Just tell me the truth." I go, right now, if you came to my office and you needed a crown, I want you to tell me honestly how much money would be when you would take your checkbook out and you would just write that checkbook to Dr. Paige, write that check to Dr. Paige for that amount of money, and you would say to yourself, "Oh, that's really fair. It's it's worth it. No problem. I just need you to be honest with me." And at that time, the average crown price was $700, $700, and we were doing them for $400, right? So I said to him, "So what would that number be?" And the guy says to me, $150. So, and I know. And that's when I looked at the guy and said, "Listen," I go, "I'm not mad at you, but like I said, but you got to understand, my overhead per hour is about $300. Okay. And it takes me 2 visits and let's say 2 hours to do the job. I can't possibly have an overhead of $600 and have you pay me $150, and the reason it's so important is because I'm sure that what he was being honest with me, right? And I'm sure what he said, he meant it. And I'm sure that if I asked, 10 people, they would probably give me a similar number. Mm-hmm. And so they have no idea of the overhead of a dental practice. And so, if insurance companies are putting out that subliminal thought that we make a lot of money and we're all overpriced, you're not going to be able to beat them at that game.
No. So who do you think is to be blamed for that when it comes to the perception of how important dentistry is to people? Do you think it's us whenever you look and you see, your neighbor dentist saying, "Oh, free cleaning, free whitening," and all this other free stuff, right? Because I've never gone to a primary care physician and gotten free anything. Except for maybe, no, I think they charged me for that Tylenol they gave me. Right. And I could have went to the CVS to get that. And I got charged, I think, double the price, what it would have been to, So I've never seen pharmacists, I've never seen dentists do anything like that. But I'm sorry, physicians do anything like that. But dentists, I feel like we're racing to the bottom. And I want to know from your experience, from when you started dentistry until now, what happened where we basically said, how can we undercut each other to the point where we're basically doing free stuff?
I think because we're all desperate to be successful. Where, to be a dentist, you have to have a certain type of personality. You have to be that success-driven guy. And I think we are success-driven. And some people are willing to work like I have, like Dr. Horton has, at a very fast rate because we're confident with it, we're comfortable with it, and we work at a lower price. Other people just don't want to do that. And I think, to answer your original question, which is what gave that perception to patients, I think it's twofold. I think one, it is that people don't understand what the overhead is, at least, which we already said. And the other thing is, I think that there are a certain amount of very expensive dentists out there who do have the attitude, this is my price. If you don't like it, you go somewhere else. And I think a certain amount of people run into that dentist before they go to the other type. Mm. And I think so that all that, and the third thing would be the insurance companies, the way they run things. They won't raise reimbursements until the pressure is so high to do it. And as we all know, right now, we're in a real crunch time. There's never been a time that I remember in the past 38 years when the insurance companies have been putting a crunch on us as hard as they are right now. And just to give you some idea, when I started in dentistry, I could run a dental practice, and even at my lower fees, and I could run a 30% profit margin. When I sold my last practice, my profit margin was 8% when I sold it. And that's one of the reasons why I said it was time to retire. They just, without either raising my prices far beyond what the PPOs would pay me and have to make the patients pay that much if they would stay. But the complication is, really, they could just go down the street and find somebody else and not have to pay it. Right? So until the insurance companies raise the reimbursements, we're really stuck in this place right now, And to give you an example, not even using general dentistry, when I started in dentistry, the average orthodontic treatment, let's say, was about $4,000 for start to finish to get ortho treatment for your children, let's say. And the insurance companies reimbursed about $1,500 to $2,000 at 50%. So basically, if they reimbursed $2,000 and the treatment was $4,000, the insurance would give $2,000, and then the patient would pay $2,000. Right? Today, the average ortho treatment in a big city is $8,000. They still give a $2,000 reimbursement. So now you're talking about 25% of the cost is only covered by the insurance company. Right. How do you fight that? It's like they don't have to do what they don't have to do. And there's not a single insurance company, to my knowledge, that has raised that reimbursement above $2,000 that I know of, that I'm aware of.
Well, let me ask you this, because that's a great point. And I remember I actually had to look this up while we were talking. The year was 2012, and it was this huge uproar because who was it? James Dwyer was the CEO of Delta Dental, and they had just announced a whole lot of reimbursement cuts. And when they asked him, the reporter asked him, well, how do you expect dentists to make up for that? He had this extremely flippant remark where he basically said, well, they're just going to have to start working hard like the rest of us.
Well, right. He also said they'll have to stop playing golf on Friday and work an extra day.
Exactly. This is a guy that made $1.2 million a year at the time as a CEO, painting us as these money-hungry, overly rich, So what do you think the answer is? Can we band together as dentists? Can we do anything to fight the insurance company, as you've seen over the years in the different areas you practiced?
Well, back in 2012, what you're referring to, I remember the Washington State Dental Association, having a lot of talks with the membership, and they were talking about doing things. And if I remember right, they were threatened by the insurance companies with collusion if they continued. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not really up on the legal term exactly what collusion means, but I remember there was some threat about about, be careful about collusion, and so they pretty much the membership backed off, and they let it happen where they cut the fees. But the funny thing is, insurance companies, sure, they collude too, but they just don't do it. They don't do it in a way that's called collusion. So for example, okay, being a little facetious, but if 300 dentists got together and they met in a pub somewhere, and they all said, "Hey guys, let's all get together and drop out of WDS PPO at the same time, so they have less providers," they would call that collusion. And according to the law, that probably is what collusion is. But if you're Washington Dental Service, or you're Aetna, or United Concordia, or any PPO, and let's say one of the big ones, your competitors, lowers their price down, you just lower your price down because they did. Or if they raise it up, you go, "Oh, we could raise ours up too." It's no collusion. You're not meeting in a bar and talking about raising your prices. You just look at what's going on in the industry, and you just follow suit, And that's the problem in general, with really large corporations controlling a lot of one industry,
So that's the George Carlin saying, where he says, you don't need an official conspiracy where interests converge.
Exactly.
Right? So they don't have to meet in the boardroom and talk about that, as long as their interests are all, oh, you raise, okay, I'll raise mine. Oh, you raising yours?
Yeah. No,
we don't even have to meet, right?
Yeah. No, that's exactly right, Dr. Horton. That's what it is, and they have the power, and we don't. And like I said, so with the perception of us being these, money hungry guys just trying to make a lot of money and everything else, we have very little power. So in answer to Walter's question, I don't know how you fight that. I don't know how you overcome that, how you educate the public as to that's just not true, that we're these mean ogres. You know what I'm saying? Only maybe on an individual basis in the dental chair, with your patients that you can maybe convert that thought process. But other than that, unless you have some better idea than me, I can't think of any to fight that.
Well, okay, let me ask you this question about I'm going to call it the history of dentistry. Ready? Yes. So there have been times in dentistry when we went from like the aesthetic time in dentistry. I think it was the early or late 90s to early 2000s, where everybody was doing like veneers and composite veneers and so forth, right? And then we went to sleep apnea, and then implants became hot, and then we started doing ortho with Invisalign and so forth. And I find that we keep going to these little phases of what's exciting and what's gonna make you a lot of money, and then we have all these gurus talking and stuff like that. Have you noticed that more and more with dentistry as we've gone along? Or is this something that, and do you think that people that are doing it are becoming educated, or is it one of those things where let me just take a weekend course, now all of a sudden I'm doing this implant and I'm doing, veneers and full mouth rehabs, because we fall into these phases where people get excited about something, sleep apnea, whatever it may be.
Right. Yeah. For me personally, if I didn't do some specialized treatments in my career, I would have been bored a long time ago. Seriously, I've done a lot of orthodontics, and I've done lots and lots of dental implants, bone grafting, sinus lifts, the whole thing. And if I didn't do that, I would have been bored 15 years ago. But in your question to can it be done safely?
Right. And is it like a fad as we go along? Like every 5 years there's a new fad. Would you consider it to be a fad, or?
No, I think it's necessity, because you can only do so many fillings and crowns. And I think out of necessity to keep the money flowing and keep your interest in dentistry, I think you do those things. Not everybody, but I would say 80% do. The question is, can it be done safely? And Dr. Horton and I talk about this a lot. And we know that, I know Dr. Horton's really good. I feel that I'm really good. So, but we have put the time in, and time to get educated, and the time doing whatever we had to do to get the knowledge that we were comfortable and good practitioners. I can't say that everybody does that, right. And so how do you know if they do, they don't? As dentists, we know. Does the public know? Probably not. That's one of the things I think if the public really wants to, they have the right to ask their dentist, like, where did you get your training, and how much hours did you spend learning, and so and so, right? I think the public could do that. Do they do that? Probably not, but they certainly could.
Well, but and then how does the public know, right? Because a lot of people, one thing that I don't think people and dentists really understand is how much trust somebody has for a dentist. There have been times where they're like, why don't you just do that? Why do you need to send me to this person? And some dentists are forced to basically talk patients into going somewhere versus saying, hey, I just don't know how to do this. Right.
Yeah.
So how do we educate patients to ask the right questions? And this podcast is trying to do that. But how do we as dentists educate patients to ask the right questions so they can get the right answer, and also when it comes to getting a second opinion, I feel like that has to be something that should be talked about more often versus a taboo situation.
Yeah, that's a tough question. Because I look at myself. I'm getting older. I'm 71 years old. Knock on wood, I'm healthy, right? But as you get older and older, things happen. And so I've asked myself, let's say I needed a heart operation, right? I would literally say, how do I know the guy I just went to is any good, right? I mean, and I'm a professional, right? But if I went to a professional that was going to do heart surgery on me, I would have no way of knowing whether that person was going to be doing good for me or not. And it's a scary thought, right? So I don't really have an answer to your question because I thought about that. For me going on in life, that one day I'm going to have to make those decisions for who knows what. And so I don't have an answer, but I would welcome anything you could offer on that, or Dr. Horton could offer on that.
Right.
Because it is a tough question. We ask our friends, right?
Yeah.
And we ask our family members who maybe have had a similar thing done, right? And see what their outcome is. So I guess that's about the best answer I could give you, right? You would ask your friends and your family members who might have had similar things done and had good outcomes.
Well, let's stay on the hard question trend here.
Yeah.
Walt, our good friend Walt's a periodontist. I'm soon to be periodontist, and we know that there's a culture war between specialists and GPs, right?
Yeah.
So if I was to play devil's advocate and put the protective specialist hat on and say, well, Steve, you're just a GP. What makes you think you should be doing implants? And I know you've heard that question before, because I know I heard it when I was a GP doing it.
Oh, yeah.
How do you respond? How does that make you feel, and how do you respond to that?
And how would I respond to a specialist saying that to me?
Right. And then what's the conversation me and you would have afterwards?
Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly. So I respond to the specialist saying that to me. Like I would say, yeah, some specialists are highly trained and highly talented, right? And yes, they will do a better job than I will. But your average periodontist probably doesn't do it any better than me because I know who I am and I know my training and I know my ability. And I would say, but once again, somebody just going to a periodontist's office, how do they know that that's a highly trained periodontist versus a hack? How do they know? Right. So, but when I talk to you, right, as my friend, a colleague, we both know that in all specialist training programs, the training in a specialist program is pretty minimal, and there's a lot of them come out that it takes them a long time before they really get a handle on their specialty, right? Someone who comes right out, I don't want to sound really audacious, but I probably do better than them. Right. I mean, but so it's like everything else. For the patient, they don't really have a good way of knowing whether somebody is a talented person or not. Just like I don't know if that heart surgeon is really talented or not. So that's why I go back to, once again, no matter where you go to, you got to go on recommendations. You got to ask your friends. You got to ask your family members. But in general, the real question is, does a periodontist who goes to the perio program, does a higher percentage of them get really good at their trade versus a general dentist doing it who gets good at the trade? There, I might say some specialist who goes through the program, since that's all they're going to do over time, they'll probably get more talented over time than someone who dabbles in everything. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So to some degree, I think over time, a specialist will get better at that part of dentistry. But once again, not every specialist is going to be as talented as another guy, or another girl, let's say, So did that answer your question, I guess?
No, it really does. Because one thing that I've seen is that a lot of programs, as they choose, whether it's OS, ortho, perio, they choose off of didactics, academics, and scores. And that really doesn't always translate into hand skills. And I've seen some extremely talented specialists, but I've seen some GPs that were just artists, like blow me out the water. I feel like I'm a pretty good clinician, but I've seen, like, we had one guy in our in my class, his name was Christian, the most beautiful, gorgeous wax ups you've ever seen from day one. He was just extremely talented. I think he ended up going into endo, but it is interesting to see who gets chosen for these specialties, and then the culture within that specialty of we're the best, we're superior because we did this, and so forth. When that doesn't, like you said, it doesn't always translate. But you're right. If you do one thing or one set of things, and that's all you do, over time you probably will improve far beyond someone that is a jack of all trades and not necessarily a master.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying, and I believe that. Yeah, I believe that. So, but everybody's gonna, like, the patients themselves, like Walter said, that some patients like to go to a specialist, some patients don't. Some will say to the general dentist, "Oh, please don't send me to that specialist," whether it's money or whatever. They feel comfortable with that dentist and rather stay there if they can do it, right? Others, you say go to specialists, they're out the door, So it varies, I think, patient to patient a lot. And I don't know why the patient would choose that really. It might just be their comfort level with the general dentist, I guess,
So as time has gone on, we've gotten better with technology, we'll say, right? We'll say technology's improved, right?
Yeah.
But I've also noticed that in dentistry, I'm not sure if the quality of work has improved, meaning that, I've seen patients get crowns, or I've been told, right, because they send them to me for extractions. And I've seen a patient get a crown, and a year and a half later, this crown has broken, fractured, this tooth has broken down, whatever it may be. And all of a sudden I'm taking this tooth out, when I'm not sure if it's just the fact that now we have, in-house mills, and, we have a lot of stuff that now dentists are doing in-house versus sending it to a lab, and the lab tech who was trained to do a lot of this stuff. What do you see when it comes to technology in dentistry? And has that technology made dentistry better, or has it made it worse? Like, basically, if you were doing crappy dentistry, now you're doing crappy dentistry faster.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like,
I
felt like,
what you mean.
right? I felt like back in the day, I remember when we were in school, we had to do our wax ups, and then we had to learn how to, cast our crowns and so forth. So we had to learn all that stuff. Now it's just send it to a machine, hope that your margins are correct, let the machine do the work, you put it on, and then you basically use the cement to hold on to dear life. And then that's it, right? Yeah. And I feel like that's where dentistry is gone. But tell me, from what you've seen, if that's what you're seeing as well, and if you agree with that.
Right. Well, I think, I think the technology in dentistry is definitely making dentistry better in the right hands. In other words, what good is technology if you don't use it well, right? But I think if in the right hands and the technology is used well, I think technology is wonderful. Just a really great example of technology, as you know, implants, right? You used to freehand all your implants off of a two-dimensional panoramic X-ray, right? Then you got CTs, three-dimensional X-rays, which would help you visualize your hand, your hand done by hand better. And now you got, CTs with the models laid over them, and with the software that can make you a surgical guide that can pinpoint it to within, let's say, a half of a millimeter. And now they even have robots that won't even let you vary off the track, as you know. So I think in the good hands, I think the machines are great, but the cost is the issue. You know, some of them are really prohibitive cost-wise, but over time they always come down in price, which is really good. But I think the real problem, what you alluded to, is margins and stuff. I think dentistry in itself is an art. I've always said that we don't put your tooth back to what God, I'll say God, right? We don't put your tooth back to what God made it. We patch it, and we do a really good job of patching it, right? It's amazing when you think that I've seen people come in on my office who had a crown in their mouth for 40 years. 40. Think of all the abuse that crown gets for 40 years. But here's the thing. When the crown was originally done, if the tooth was in relatively good condition when that crown was done well, that crown will last 40 or 50 years. But if the tooth was really in beat up condition when it was done, and the practitioner made the decision to put that crown on that tooth, rather than say, maybe we're wasting this money and we should take that tooth out and opt for an implant or a bridge, then that crown will break off in 2 years, and then you look kind of foolish. But those are decisions we all make every day, right? And some of those decisions are hard to make, because you don't really want to tell a patient to take the tooth out and then get a bridge or implant. So you try to do, we call dental heroics, right? And you do, or heroodontics, whatever they say, and you try to save things that maybe was a bad choice to save in the first place. Am I answering your questions for you?
Yeah.
I look at dentistry, and it's beneficial for me, I'll be honest, because I'm taking more teeth out, but I'm not sure how beneficial it is for patients when they pay so much. And then, something doesn't last as long as they would think, or research would tell us, right? And that's the part that I'm looking and saying, are we doing too much? Are we basically, like you said, trying to be heroes and saving teeth when they shouldn't be saved? Now you have a patient doing root canal, putting a crown on that tooth. So that's expensive right there.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, a few months later, or whatever it may be, that same tooth is now being extracted, and we're talking about implants or whatever it may be. And I just don't know if we're benefiting patients by doing things like this. And then are we doing too much of that now? Or is this something that just as time's gone by, this is what's happening?
In general, I do believe that there's too much heroodontics being done. I have seen it by doctors who worked for me, people I've known. I think there does come a time when you have to, unfortunately, tell the patient, you're just going to waste your money. Like you say, you get a root canal, then you get a crown, then it breaks off, and then you got extracted and do an implant. I think that's wrong. But then if you know Leroy and myself, we have many times, if in the office, if someone came in with a situation like that where a tooth broke off, 2 years later, we always gave them credit towards what they've paid towards the implant. I've always done that, but I know most people wouldn't do that, but we have done that. And I think every practitioner needs to look at their work. They need to look at their pocketbook and say, there's a time where you just don't think about the money. There's a time where you just got to do the right thing, right?
Well, then here's a follow-up real quick with that, though. A lot of, associates come into the offices and they stay, a year. So they've already left when that patient comes back.
I was going to ask that same thing.
Yeah. What do we do in that situation?
Those stories all day long.
Yeah.
No, we could be until tomorrow. Okay.
So what do you do in that situation? Like that. I mean, when are we just gonna take a hit for that office? And if it's a corporate office, how does that work? Is the patient gonna have to repay because that doctor that served you isn't here anymore?
Yeah, I don't know what a corporate office does, but in my offices, within what I felt was any reasonable time frame, I would fix it for free. In fact, I just talked to Leroy today about a case that I'm gonna pay him to do, because one of the doctors did something that failed, and it was in a practice that I just sold. So I'm going to give Leroy the money to fix it. because I felt that it should have lasted longer. And so that's a typical example. But do I think everybody does that? I think your average practitioner will bite their tongue really hard before they do that.
But I think that leads us into a great topic, because we talked about associate pay structure. We talk about how much debt students are graduating with and the pressures they feel, how much money they think they should or need to make. Does the pressures that they feel potentially influence their decision making and treatment planning, as you've maybe observed with different providers?
Yeah.
And B, as an owner, how do you mitigate someone who's a gunner, who all of a sudden they walk in and in a practice that's only maybe done 10 crowns a week, now they're finding 50, knowing that they're only going to be around, like Walt said, a year and a half,
right,
and you have to deal with the aftermath. What do you think is going on there, and how do you deal with that as an owner?
Yeah, well, I just think it gets down to the same thing that I said about 10 dentists coming to work for me, 2 of them being really good, and I didn't have to worry about them. The 6 that were average, the ones that were kind of average, but maybe a little less, I would have to watch more carefully, right? And if I saw a lot of things they were doing that I didn't agree with, I would talk to them and I would say, my rules are, let's say for a crown, right? My rules were I would never let someone crown just somebody who had a large silver filling. Okay, there had to be more than that. There had to be recurrent decay or a cracked cusp. There had to be a better reason for just doing it just because they could do a crown on a charge, right? So I have rules and I put them down, and I said, these are the rules, my rules. And once I put my rules down, my rules weren't anything that would change their quality of their doing the dentistry. I wasn't saying anything that would put them at any kind of legal or quality risk, right? I just said, I'm trying to be fair to everybody. These are my rules, and if they follow them, I had never had problems. Not much, right? So over the years, the story we just said, like, you have to redo something, I'm paying you. That that only happened, like, I would say at most it would happen 2-3 times a year. So it wasn't a financial burden, is what I'm saying. Okay, but yeah, if I probably hired the guys at the lower rung, right, or girls, the guys and girls at the lower rung, and I didn't pay a lot of attention to what was going on, it might have gotten a little bit out of hand, but I was always there, always paying attention, and I always knew who I had to give a little more time to, and not, you were always my superstar, right? So, when you came in, I just said, yeah, I saw who you were, and I said, I don't have to worry, right?
Right.
And I always knew who I didn't have to pay attention to and who I did. And, when someone was really worrisome to me, I just, like I said, in the nicest way, I said to them, this office is too busy for you. You need to find a job in an office that has a much slower pace, and you need to do it for a year or 2 years and get your comfort level up, because everybody develops that at a different rate, as you know.
Absolutely.
So I guess I want to ask this question in the nicest way I can possibly find to ask. I'm very bad at this, as people know. Right?
No, you're great, man. You're great. You're great.
Do you think, because there's a lot of, new dentists that, they're in their feelings, right? If somebody fires them, it's their fault. If somebody says, hey, you may not, be able to work here because it's high pace and all this other stuff, they'll turn around and tell everybody that it was you as the owner, because you as the owner is either greedy or whatever it may be. Do you think that dentistry... Yeah, right. Do you think that the new kids are grown or coming out of school without the realism of what dentistry is going to bring you? Because I remember when I graduated, my advisors, my mentors were like, it's going to be hard. You need to look at your numbers. You need to see how long it takes you to do this, and this. And I still have the same mentors to now, where they tell me, like, do you know what your numbers are? How fast can you do this? If you're doing a root canal and you can't access it in 10 minutes, send that out, because that's a waste of your time. You're not profitable. Talking business.
Yeah.
Now I feel like everybody says, I feel I deserve this. I feel I deserve that. And there is no realism when it comes to actual business. And how do I contribute to an office, which is a business?
It's absolutely true that new grads, for the most part, don't have any clue as to the business of dentistry whatsoever. None.
But they want to get paid a lot.
And they want to get paid a lot because here's the thing. Someone who's not that skilled, I found, doesn't know it. Okay? They don't know it. And so that's why I always very gentle with them when I let them go, because sure, I'd like to say, hey, you really stink, you got a problem, but I would never say that, right? I'd always say this office is too busy for you. You got to slow down. And, and maybe that's what they really need, right? Or maybe they're just that person that's never going to be talented no matter what, right? But either way, I don't want them working for me because I don't want the headaches that come with it, right? Which is why, to answer your question, that's why my headaches were minimal, because I never let it go on too long if I felt that, right? So, but as far as the business of dentistry, nobody comes out of school with any knowledge of the business of dentistry. Even when I graduated, I really honestly believe that if I opened up dental practice, and I was going to do a crown on somebody, and I said, Mr. Jones, that crown would be, $600. And I thought they would take their checkbook out and say, no problem, who do I make it out to? You know what I mean? Well, I very quickly realized that was just not true, right? So the average, I think anybody that comes out of dental school, unless their father was a dentist or their mother was a dentist or something like that, really has no clue as to the numbers and the business in answer to you guys' questions,
Now, how many of your former associates have called you after they've left and opened their own practice and said, Dr. Paige, I get it now?
Yeah.
On all those things that we disagreed on, that I thought you needed to give more, do more, I get it. Because I've gotten at least 3 or 4 of those calls from ones that work for our 2 offices, but you've probably gotten a lot more.
Yeah, I haven't so much got calls, but when I would go to some CE course somewhere, and I always run into people that work for me or who I know, and that was something that came up all the time. It's like, wow, Dr. Paige, I go, now that I got my own practice, I had no idea. And I hear it all the time. And so I'm laughing that you do too, because that's true,
Well,
so
yeah, I'm sorry. No, let me ask you this last question from my end. When it comes to what we see in dentistry now, how would somebody who wants to open a practice do it? Okay. And then do you think it's actually feasible now to open your own standalone practice? Or is it one of those things where you're just going to get swallowed up by DSO anyway? So what does it really matter?
Well, if you're gonna open up your own practice today, my advice would be you have to be willing to go out to the suburbs or even beyond that. I truly, but here's the thing, like, I'm a city boy, right? I grew up in big cities my whole life. I don't want to live in I don't know, someplace in Eastern Washington. You know what I mean? It's like, so for me, there's one choice. But if you're okay with going out of the city, there's no question about it. Starting a dental practice outside of the big cities is easier. Okay, because once again, because you don't have the DSO infusion, right? And you have people that are used to a different style of dentistry. So I think it's better if you're willing to do that. But if you want to stay in the city, you're right. You're gonna have a really tough time with what's going on with DSOs and everything. I just think it'll be really difficult. Plus, you really should work for a while before you do it, because if you have no experience, the dental supply people, I don't mean to beat on the dental supply companies, right? But if they get a hold of you and you tell them you want to open a practice, they will make sure that the architects get a hold of you and the contractors get a hold of you, and they will not find the cheapest guy or some reasonable guy for you. They will find the most expensive person in town. And I know it sounds really cruel to say, but I've seen this happen to so many people that I've known. And when they tell me what it cost them to open their practice, I just say to myself, God, I could have done that for half of that. Leroy knows this too,
Yeah.
and it's sad. There are vultures out there in the business, they really exist. And so somebody without experience, the worst thing they could do is try to open the practice without any business experience at all. That I don't know how you even I don't even know how you crawl out of that, you know?
Well, here's a question for you. Do you think culturally we talk a lot about the gold standard being owning your own practice, having the $1 million practice and so forth? Do you think ownership is for everyone?
No, absolutely not. I think with the DSOs, if you're willing to hustle, you can make a good enough living that ownership might not be for you if you don't want the responsibility of employees. As you know, there's lots of employees, there's lots of bills to pay. There's just so many things to do that take time out of your life besides just chair time. Okay. And so, it can get pretty taxing at times. So I think if someone doesn't want to do all that, then I think, just hustling for 7 hours during the day and going home is probably a good solution,
Would you still tell a young person who comes from, meager financial backgrounds to see dentistry as an opportunity, given the industry of student loan debt, practice debt, and so forth? You think it's still viable?
That's the problem because there are so many things you could do today and have a fraction of the debt and make a fair living, and the cost of going to dental school now is so expensive that, I don't know how people crawl out of it. I mean, people are coming out of debt now, like I hear $600,000. I mean, it would take you a lifetime to pay that off. When I got my loan, the maximum time you could spend to pay off the loan was 15 years, and I paid mine off in 12. And before that, a couple years before me, they would only give a 10-year loan. Now they give 25-year loans. It's like a mortgage of a house.
Yeah.
So that would be scary to me. I'll be honest, that would be scary to me. But if somebody really wants to be in the health sciences, the healing sciences, I think then if you're going to be a dentist or a doctor or nurse or chiropractor, you're going to have to spend the money, and unless we start having different ways in this government where maybe people go to school, they don't pay, and then you go devote 3 or 4 years to community service, which I'm all for. I think that's probably should be an option for everybody, because not everybody wants to come out of school $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 in debt, and I wouldn't blame them because it's a scary thought,
I lied. I have one more question, and I just thought about this for you before we wrap up here. But one question is, if you had to pick, who is the enemy of dentistry? Ready? The enemy of dentistry: insurance, dental schools, or corporations? If you had to pick,
you got to pick one.
If you had to pick one,
that's the insurance company. That's easy for me. Insurance companies. Yep. I think in general, right now they offer so little for what the premiums are. If you think about it, I don't know all the numbers, but let's make one up. Let's say, for example, some corporation pays some insurance company $100 a month for each employee for them to have some dental benefit. In most cases, if the dental benefits, let's say $1,500 a year or something, if they get 1 crown done, they've used up their benefit pretty much. So I think if someone said to the employees, why don't I just give everybody $100 a month? Instead of buying dental insurance, I'll just give you $100 a month. Well, the people who need the dental work will still get $1,200 a year, and they can get about the same amount of benefit, and everybody else could do what they want with the money. They could save it, they could buy beer, I don't care, but it seems to me like for the benefit that they give out for the money, it seems like a corporation would be better off spending the money just giving the people the money.
Right. Walter interviewed a guy recently, and what did he say, Walt, about I'm not getting dental insurance for the $1,500, I'm getting it for the discount plan that comes with it. And obviously that's another thing that, our listeners, if you're a practicing dentist, you already know not only do insurance companies dictate what they pay you and stuff they cover, but your contracts dictate what you can charge for their patients on stuff they don't cover.
Exactly.
And that's why I think that's obviously a good answer to say that, insurance companies are probably the number one enemy of dentistry, because by controlling the purse, they indirectly affect treatment decisions that are either partaken by the patient or that are offered by the clinician.
Right. Well, they do make decisions for how they pay you based on what they think, and in essence, they're acting as a provider when they do that. As a, they are making decisions that really go against the fact that it should be your decision, right? But I mean, it doesn't happen a lot, but it does on certain areas. But I just feel that in most of all, just for what somebody's paying for that benefit for their employees, I just think the money could be spent better doing other things.
I agree.
Wow. Well, this was, I love just talking to somebody who has a lot of experience in anything, because you sit back and you realize two things. You realize, one, you don't have it that bad because you've seen the gambit, you've seen the glory times, the great times, and you've seen now, and you're like, you've gone through it, so you actually know what it looked like when insurance didn't deal with everything. We're young to the game, so we don't have to, we don't know what paradise looked like.
Yeah, that's true. But then again, even before me, the people before me were saying it was really paradise. Like dentists in the 60s and the 70s, they were telling me that, man, you could open up an office right out of school, and boom, 2 months later you're making a living. That's what they would say. But I don't think that's been true since 1975.
Yeah. No, it's tough, man. But I hope that people are listening and kind of getting an idea. The whole point of this is to try to kind of educate and say there's a way for us to get back to what we think. And I mean, again, I think we're talking to people here who have enjoyed dentistry and like what we do.
Oh yeah. I think one thing I would like to say, so because if lay people listen to this, I would like them to know that 9.8 out of 10 dentists I know really enjoy what they do, as I know you do, right? Like we do. We're a funny breed. We do dentistry because we really like it, and but at the same time we want to make a living too, right? So that's the conflict, right? The conflict is we love what we do, and some of them do it for way longer than they should. Like me, I just retired at 71. So I wouldn't have done it for so long if I didn't like it, right? But there's a time in everybody's life you gotta like smell the roses, So for me, it's time to enjoy whatever time I have left on this earth, but I do spend time, helping others, and helping young guys learn more, and that's something that I enjoy to do, and I hope to make a positive impact on anybody that I come in touch with when it comes to learning dentistry, because we do love what we do, and the average person out there should know that when they go see a dentist, they do it because they do like it. They don't go to work every day and say, "Oh my God, I hate going to work." That we don't do that. We're like everybody else. We get tired and we get worn out, but we do it because we do like it.
And I can lay testament to the impact you've had on others, because whether it's the impact you've had on me through the years, whether it's from the business aspect, from the implant aspect, from just the mentorship and guidance, through our friendship over the years, and how I've seen you've been that way with so many people. You're literally probably one of the most generous people, in terms of your time, your sharing, even though you're retired, we know people you're still going out to help as they're kind of getting started. And that's just, a testament to the type of person that you are. And it is interesting to see over the years, not only the evolution of dentistry, but how it affects real people, right? You can love what you do, but if you really got into this because you wanted to help people, the business sides can really bog you down. The insurance game can really have a strong negative effect on your spirit when really all you signed up, and I know it sounds cheesy, but when you ask young kids why they want to be a doctor or a dentist, it's they want to help people.
Yeah, that's true.
And at the heart of it, that's what we want. But then we end up having to learn how to operate within, kind of a very, dog eat dog, letter of the law, contractual transaction in our industry. But I do applaud you. I love you, brother. We've known each other for so long.
I love you too, brother. Yeah.
I thank you for sharing. And yeah, I'll let Walt close it out. If he has anything to say or ask, I think this is a good time.
No. I mean, I was just gonna sit back with let the bromance kind of, melt this out, and so we can leave wonderfully, And I will say, I'm gonna say that Steve has said so many nice things about Leroy that I'm not sure if I believe him anymore. Because I know Leroy. he said so many nice things, and I was like, man,
are we talking about the same guy?
Are we talking about the same person? But no, it's nice, man. Like the friendship and just the collaboration, and I think that's what dentistry should be. I really believe that. I truly believe that that's what dentistry should be. We shouldn't be sitting there going after each other, because as we all said, and I think Steve said it so eloquently, like if you had to pick the three of what was messing up dentistry, I think we can all agree on one corporate, one entity, and I'm not going to repeat the entity, insurance, but we know that in the end, we're never going to say, oh, is that guy down the street who's also a dentist. We're never going to point fingers at each other, and we should stop doing that. I really do think that it's a collaborative thing. We're all in this together, and we need to remember that whenever we're working or doing our day to day. So I think it's wonderful. Steve, I'm going to leave you with the last word. What would you like to say to anybody in dentistry about just the field of dentistry and what you've learned throughout the years?
I'd just like to say that it's even though it's very expensive to get through dental school, it's still, I think in the long run, I still think you'll get your loans paid off. I think you'll get to a point where you'll start saving some money. And I think in the end of your work life, like me, you'll be okay. I think you'll be okay. And I think you could be, if you're good, you'll be proud of what you've done for 30 or 40 years, whatever it is, and I really appreciate you doctors for allowing me to say these things. Okay. And I hope to see both of you soon.
Absolutely, man.
Absolutely, man. Thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome very much. Okay.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Truth Be Told. The opinions on this episode are just that, our opinions. Please consult your dental professional before taking any action with your dental health. If you have any questions about anything you heard on this episode, please contact us at Real Dentist with an S. That's REAL Dentist with an S at gmail.com. We would be very happy to return any message that we receive, because we love the communication that we have with our listeners.